You are seen. You are worthy. You are not alone. The world loses one person to suicide every 40 seconds. Let's change the stats. Together, we can say not suicide. Not today.
What do you do when you feel that you've possibly met the man of your dreams and you find out that he's deceptive? As a matter of fact, he's a con man who faked his own death and stole a treasure of ancient gold and silver coins that are still missing to this day? Will you write a book that is part true crime and part memoir? Join me as I talk to author Susan Ashline on this episode of True Crime, Authors and Extraordinary People.
Welcome to True Crime, Authors and Extraordinary People, the podcast where we bring two passions together. The show that gives new meaning to the old adage, truth is stranger than fiction, and reminding you that there is an extraordinary person in all of us. Here is your host, David McClam.
What's going on, everybody, and welcome to another episode of True Crime, Authors and Extraordinary People. Of course, I'm your man, David McClam. Hey, if you guys haven't already, make sure you follow us on all of our social media. One link to a link tree will get you every place you need to go pertaining to the show. All right, before we get started, as always, you heard at the top of the show, if you are someone or know someone that wants to hurt themselves or others, please go and dial 988. You can reach them either by text or by phone. It is the suicide prevention hotline. No matter what you're going through, nothing is worth your life. And if no one has told you today, let me be the first. I do care, and we do need you to be here. All right, so as you look at your calendars, you know it is time for yet again another fabulous author, and I do have a good one for you today. Let me introduce who our guest is. She is the author of the nationally acclaimed true crime book, Without a Prayer, The Death of Lucas Leonard and How One Church Became a Cult. She is an Emmy-nominated journalist whose career spans more than 25 years. Her work has received major awards, including a first-place Associated Press Award for Journal Excellence and Individual Reporting and a Gannett Gold Medal Award. She graduated from the University of Massachusetts, and she studied at the University of New Mexico and the State University of New York. She is the author of A Jacket Off the Gorge, True Story of the Biggest Liar. Please welcome author Susan Ashline. Hi, Susan. Thank you for joining me today.
Hi, David. Thanks for having me on.
It is definitely my honor and my pleasure. So the question I like to ask all my guests off the top is there anything else about Susan Ashline that we don't know from your introduction?
Well, I don't know. It's part memoir. So if you read the book, you'll know a lot about me, probably more than anyone wants to know.
So I think it is important to point out, I think I mentioned in your introduction, you are an author. You have one other book called Without a Prayer, The Death of Lucas Leonard and How One Church Became a Cult. Tell us a little bit about that book and briefly what happened to Leonard.
Yeah, Without a Prayer is about a 19-year-old young man who was beaten to death by members of his congregation. Well, it actually turned out to be a cult. So he and his brother were beaten. The 17-year-old brother survived, but 9 individuals were convicted in that case, including his mother, his father, and his sister. Actually, his father, Bruce Leonard, is slated to be released from prison soon. He should be out in May.
Oh, wow. That one sounds very good, too. I haven't got to read that one yet, but that's definitely on my list now. So you point out in this book and in the title of it that the church became a cult. How did you find that out? Or is it just because of the beatings, or what were they doing that was cult-like?
Well, it was the prosecution's, the DA's office that determined it was a cult. And that was one of the things that they would have proven to prove culpability of the people who ran that church/cult had they gone to trial. So they amassed all of these files to indicate that they were a cult so that they could argue that at trial. But what happened was the sister went to trial and was convicted and received a very long sentence. So everybody else took plea deals. No one else ended up going to trial. So none of that other information about them being a cult was unearthed. It was kept in those files, kept secret, hidden, but it's public information until I uncovered them and wrote the book. So all of that is laid out in the book. How they were a cult, the origins of it, the initial individual who started that cult, and how people kind of got sucked into it.
Oh, wow. So yeah, everybody go out and get a copy of that one. I'm going to read that book for sure. And maybe we'll have you come back and we can have a more in-depth conversation around that one as well. So I look forward to that one.
Definitely.
That kind of leads us into your current book. Again, the title is A Jacket Off the Gorge, True Story of the Biggest Liar. Now, in this book, you kind of tell the story. So you get pulled in by this con man, but he has already been, in his life of crime since he's been young, way before you met him, named John Fontaine. Tell us a little bit about that a little bit.
Yeah, I had no idea when I met him that he had a criminal past. I had broken up with a boyfriend. Actually, he broke up with me, and I was quite upset about that. I had met some guys, wasn't interested in them. One I found out had been convicted of a harassment, and I thought, absolutely not. He has a criminal record, harassment, no. Well, then I come to be hooked up by a friend with this guy, John Fontaine. I fall head over heels for him. I don't find out later until a few weeks later, at least, that he had this criminal past, which included he had faked his own death over Letchworth Gorge here in upstate New York. And that resulted in a 4-day search by state police and a helicopter and sniffer dogs. And they eventually found his jacket in the gorge and told his folks that he was dead. Well, he was ultimately captured, taken back, served a prison sentence, but not for that. And then my friend sets me up with him. I don't know about his past. I don't know he's on parole. But when I find out what he had done, I can't reconcile it with the person I see before me. So I just think he's just really changed. He's on a positive road now. This was a different person. Let the past stay in the past. So I continued on with him.
So it's important to let the audience know when I say that you did not know, John, guys, was a criminal since he was a teenager. He had this big dream of being this big lucrative drug dealer. And long before he met Susan, he was already into this. So as you said, he did get caught. He staged his own death. He meets you 7 years later. So it's important to point that out. Of course, he's a fugitive, but he has a big secret at this point too, which is that he has stolen a treasure of ancient gold and silver, which is still missing to this day. How did you come to find out about that?
Yeah, well, in one point I want to make too is you mentioned his past about the drug dealing, and this is part true crime, part memoir. So when I go to write the book, I uncover all of this information about him. I knew absolutely nothing about all of that other stuff, the drug dealing and all of that. But yeah, so after, I fall in love with him and I decide his past is in the past regarding the fake deaths. I don't know much more than that. And I really don't ask about it. And I want to believe he's a changed person because I am in love with him. But what happens is we go on vacation. I don't know he's on parole. We come back. He gets in trouble for leaving the state without permission. He gets locked up. At that point, it is discovered that his stepmother's house is missing this valuable coin collection. And they connect it to John. They find some of the coins in his truck, and then he gets charged with stealing that coin collection. So the coin collection at the time, the last time it was appraised, it was valued at about $250,000. That was decades ago. So with the price of gold and silver going up, plus their antique value, the value of the coins going up, it could be worth about $1 million today. And police believe it's buried. So if you've got a metal detector, you might want to get the book, see if you can find any clues, because it's still out there, right? It's got to be somewhere.
From reading the book, I kind of got the feeling that you believe that he knows exactly where this stuff is, but he refuses to give up that location. Am I right on that?
He ends up taking a plea deal, and as part of regarding the stolen coins, as part of the plea deal, he has to take a polygraph. He says what he did with the coins. I won't say what he says. It's in the book. And he passes the polygraph. But they go out and they search, and by they, law enforcers, and guess what? They don't find a thing. Ultimately, the police tell me that they believe he passed the polygraph because he's a psychopath and a pathological liar. So they believe that's how he was able to pass the polygraph.
Well, that's not shocking. Doing what I do for a living with true crime, and I'm sure you've seen this a lot too. Most people like John is that they're very manipulative. They can talk their way out of a paper bag. They can make people believe anything they want them to believe at that time, which makes them, in my opinion, some of the most dangerous individuals in the world because they have the knack to get in a situation and get out very quickly.
Right now, of course, I had no idea he was a psychopath while I was dating him. I knew he had some issues, but, people have these tropes when they talk about psychopaths. And one is, oh, he was charming. Well, you read the book, David. John was not charming. He was actually socially awkward. He was shy. And then people say, oh, he must have love bombed you. He certainly didn't love bomb me. From what I know of what love bombing is, lavishing me with constant compliments, buying me things. He wasn't doing any of these things. He was doing the little things that people do, and I do, and you do. When you first fall for somebody, it's a honeymoon period. So you do little things that you're not going to keep up. Little things like, so he did carpentry. So he'd see something broken and he'd fix it. Not a big deal, not love bombing. So again, there weren't these signs where, you could look at me and go, oh, well, she was an idiot. He was charming. He was love bombing her. How come she didn't recognize this? Everybody liked him. He surrounded himself with people of high status, which is why I think he targeted me, because I was a local celebrity. He liked my high important connections, and that made him feel important. When people are surrounded by quote unquote important people, other people look at them as though they're important, and it makes them more credible. So he was coming off with a relationship with a very credible person. She was well known. She was intelligent. I'm looking at her and thinking, well, she approved him. Why wouldn't I? He's already been pre-screened by other people. And in part two, he's actually hanging out with judges. Judges liked him. They thought he was okay to hang out with. Why wouldn't I? It's easy to get caught in this trap. And people like to listen to this story and say, oh, she was dumb, or how dumb can you be? Or, I could never fall for that. Well, believe me, you can all fall for it.
Oh, yeah, it's been proven. I'm sure you heard of the case of Dirty John. I mean, he did it to several women at one time. So I would never, and I hope any woman listening to this would never say, oh, I'll never fall for that, because the way it's set up is it's so elaborate. You won't see it until it's too late. So I totally agree with you on that.
True.
When you first met John, what was it about him that you liked?
This is hard to answer. And I don't really think I have an answer for that. And I say that in the book when I talk about my chapter meeting him. As soon as I see him, he's awkward, he's quiet, it's uncomfortable, we're completely mismatched. But I continue this date with him anyway. And at this point, you go on a date, you try to make sure, you're feeling your best, you're on your game. But I dropped that when I met him because I thought, oh no, he's not for me. So I was really myself. We ended up doing something that folks do in the country. We went shooting. That's what we do here. I live way out in the boonies. We went shooting. And he had come up behind me to brace me while I was shooting this high-powered shotgun that would cause tremendous recoil. I'm a very small person. And I'm thinking, oh, this guy has his BO. I don't want him that close to me. I shot the gun and bam, I was in love. I mean, that sounds silly, but I think you get it if you read it, how I, put it all together. It was just some moment, and suddenly my thinking about him turned. And I guess that set the stage for what was to come next. So I ended up spending more time with him that night, and I went out with him again. And as things progressed, I found out that he was extremely intelligent. He was thoughtful. He was loving to me. We talked for hours. We had good conversation. And though he was still quiet around friends and other people, he opened up to me. And I saw that as a sign that, he also felt the same way about me, that he was comfortable to opening himself up to me, whereas he was normally closed off.
Now he's basically on the run. Did he give you any red flags like, I can't go here, I can't do this, holding his head down, anything that would have kind of tipped you off to maybe something's not quite right with this guy?
I think you're confusing a couple of different parts of the book. When I meet him, he had already been caught after the phony death thing, and he served an unrelated prison sentence. So he was on parole when I met him. He wasn't still a fugitive at that point. But I didn't know he was on parole. It can be a little confusing, but I didn't know he was on parole. And I had no clue because, again, we had gone on vacation. We left the state. I didn't know he would even need to ask permission because I didn't know he was on parole. His parole, he had a curfew of 8 or 9 o'clock. We were out till all hours of the night. He wasn't supposed to leave the county. We did. He didn't abide by any of these rules.
Okay, they would clean it up because, that's how I interpret that part. So I wasn't sure either if I was right or wrong about that. So thanks for clearing that up.
Yeah.
So I do know, like you have already pointed out, you are a woman of means. You probably had every connection and resource that he needed. I have to ask this for the audience because I know my audience, I can hear what they're saying to me, which is, when you know this stuff, do you feel like that he ever really loved you, or was he just using and manipulating you?
I know that he loved me and the other women that he called his girlfriends. So, he was with various women here and there over time that meant nothing to him. But I know, there's Morgan in part 2. I know he loved and cared for her to the extent that he could. I think that because of his mental health issues, he didn't understand how to cope with that emotionally. But I do believe he had an emotional attachment, and people who are sociopaths can and do form emotional attachments. That's a myth to say that they can't and they don't.
Oh, yeah, I totally believe they do. I've done several stories where that's happened and people's going back saying, ain't no way they can feel this. They do. And I think a lot of times psychopaths do get caught up in their own feelings. Sometimes this is how they trip up, right? Because they find that one that is the genuine article for them, but now they're trapped into this scenario where they really can't get out. So like you pointed out, there's other women. I try to be vague because I want you guys to go out and read this book. But yeah, there's a treasure trove of information that I'm being vague about because this book is great. And you guys need to go and read that. So at this point in life, why did you decide to go ahead and write A Jacket Off the Gorge? There's a lot of stuff in there that you do give away, your personal life. Some things and some people I've interviewed before that's had similar stories found it kind of embarrassing at first, didn't really want to open up about it. What made this different for you?
Gosh, that's a great question. And I have a lot of different answers. So let me try to narrow that down. I wrote the book initially for catharsis. I had no intention of doing anything with it. At the end, I thought, okay, I'll self-publish it. And then I thought, try to get a traditional publisher. Ultimately, I decided to go forward with this for many reasons. There are so many important topics in there, and I really, I want it to change the world, and I want it to change things. There are so many important notes to be made about how our society treats and deals with victims of domestic violence as they try to seek help through the criminal justice system. And you know what, David? I believe you were a victim of domestic violence. So many people are afraid to come forward and talk about that. There are things that are shameful and embarrassing. And if I can be that voice, I'm going to be that voice. And you know what? If I don't make a penny off of this book, if I can help anybody read that and say, I'm not alone, then I'm a winner. I've made a fortune, right? So that is the reason why I put everything out there. And people need, when they read the book, to know you're being true to them and to yourself. No one wants to read a book where they're thinking, oh, this woman's just too perfect. It was very important to me that I put in every detail, including what made me look like a jerk, because it has to be real. I'm a real person. The other answer to that is, when I wrote this book, I never saw it as being about me until the reviews started coming in. And I never saw it as being about domestic violence, even though I'm aware that's an angle. Writing it, and promoting it initially, I only thought of it being about John and a fascinating study in, who he was, with the other elements that I felt needed to be out there. But I thought the focus of the book was John and not me. I'm hearing now reader feedback that it's like all about me, and all about the domestic violence angle. And that's okay, because if that's what they're getting out of this, as I said, that is so critical.
Well, I get it from both sides. And I'll kind of tell you why I go with that. Yes, as you noted, I am a survivor of domestic violence on both ends, from a parent being my father and from an ex-wife. And it is one of the things that is skimmed over. Right now, my son was sexually assaulted at school. I have a full-fledged investigation going on because when we reported that, the principal looked at me and go, oh, I did an investigation and 3 kids said he never did what your son's saying that he did. And I'm like, you can't tell somebody that they haven't not been sexually assaulted. It is one of the biggest crimes, domestic violence, sexual assault, that is looked over. And I pointed out to her, I said, what I do for a living is true crime. And this is why a lot of these cases never, ever gets reported, because nobody wants to believe or understand the victim in the case. And reading your book, I can feel all of that. I agree with the readers that's giving you feedback, because yes, even though the book is about John, it is also about you. It's about a lot of things of you going through domestic violence. It's also about you coming out of that where you are now. So you can never discredit that. I'll give you the compliment that I just recently interviewed Tamron Hall. If you know anything about Tamron Hall got into true crime. Now she's a host, but because the fact that her sister was a victim of domestic violence. Even though her book is surrounding crime stories, but they're not real, you can feel her sister and what she's writing in her writing. And I can feel everything that you're talking about, everything that you're going through by reading the book. Is very well done and very well laid out.
Thank you. And I'm sorry to hear about what your son is going through. Another point to make is that psychological abuse, it feels a lot different. Part of me, it's difficult to call myself a victim, because I do look at people like, your son and yourself and other people who have been physically assaulted. And that seems to me like real abuse, as though my complaints are only whining and don't merit that. And I know that's not the case, but it's hard for me to come forward and say, hey, I'm a victim, when it's quote unquote only psychological abuse. So I think there needs to be more awareness about that as well. But the other part is that, you've got the police even unwilling to call you or a victim or look at you as a victim. So there's a lot of me questioning, well, am I a victim? I'm not a victim. So that's difficult. And another point I want to make is we're talking a lot about, domestic violence and some heavy topics. But I don't want people to think this is a really heavy read. Actually, I'm sure you laughed at a lot of parts, or even cried out of sadness for John. Part 1 especially is fun. There's a whole chapter that is my favorite, getting him out on bail. So I kind of look at the book as like a parable, where you're getting this story and it's entertaining, but you're also in the process learning some different lessons.
No, that's definitely what I got of it. And that's why I liked your book, because I read a lot of books over the year, because I interview a lot of people. And there's some of these books that you just jump in and off the bat, I got whipped, I got this, that, another thing. And I'm like, okay, well, I kind of didn't even get eased into that. Yeah, your book is a mixed emotion. There's some parts that's funny that you're reading. You do a very good job of breaking things down. I don't feel like, even though, it's about John, I don't feel like you went all out to attack John. We know a lot about him, what he did previously, how he ran his life, what was going on up to the time he met you, and then after that. So no, I don't know what feedback you're getting from readers, but very well done. I liked it from the beginning because I could laugh some before I got into some of the more heavier parts. I feel for a true crime memoir as well as a personal story, it is very light, and it's something that you can get through, and it's a page turner. So yeah, I appreciate that.
Thank you. And removing myself from the emotions of it, I feel a tremendous amount of empathy for John. His story is tragic. No one comes into this world going, yeah, I want to be a diagnosed psychopath. You know, that doesn't feel good to people to be different. It's not a good thing. He didn't want that for himself. And he did spend a lot of time initially when I was first with him trying to figure out what was wrong with him. So we knew something was wrong with him, but nobody chooses to live that way, you know?
Well, now that you've lived it, I've always said this. If you listen to any of my episodes, there's several of them I've said this before, especially when I did the Gypsy Rose Blanchard case. I don't believe, and I know this is a very controversial statement, but I don't believe everybody deserves to go to jail. I think you have to look at the crime in which they've committed, where they are. I also don't believe in when you have people come from the court system and say, no, there's absolutely nothing wrong with this person. If I'm looking at a case, I'm like, I don't know, did you miss some signs? Because look at what this person is doing. Do you kind of feel like jail was the right spot for John? Or maybe there was better ways that they could have disciplined him, put him in some place where he could have got help for himself, things of that nature?
I think the biggest problem was putting him in prison and jailing him at 17 years old. And bam, that's where the start is. There were some other episodes throughout the book that you read about where there was some serious damage done to him while in prison. Was that the trigger for the horrible things and the real drastic change that happened in part 2? You know, who knows? But there are many steps along the way where there could have been and should have been intervention. We know he was diagnosed not just with, antisocial personality disorder, but a certain type of depression. I can't think of it off the top of my head what it's called, that lowers a person's self-esteem and causes them to be, depressed ongoing. None of these things were ever addressed. The mental health issues are not addressed in the context of a prison sentence. You can say, they have mental health treatment. I mean, no, you can pretty much say they don't actually have it because, seeing a therapist once every 6 months or once every 3 months for 30 minutes does nothing. There are so many problems with our criminal justice system, how we handle defendants, how we handle victims. I mean, there's so many things that need to be fixed. I don't even know where to go with that. But there were many problems with, throughout his upbringing where, changes could have been made but weren't. I don't think, though, we all eventually, it's up to ourselves. We are in charge of ourselves. And a lot of people go through hard times or have difficulties and they come out way ahead. So I don't want to pretend that anybody's to blame for his actions but John.
Oh, most definitely. He's to blame for them. He should take responsibility for them as well. I do agree. I do think the justice system needs to look at more what we do with our youth. At 16 and 17, we have all of these big time doctors like Dr. Phil and everybody else saying, well, their frontal cortex is not 100% yet, and they make all these irrational things. I just think sometimes the sentence doesn't necessarily fit the crime. And when you have somebody like that, like you said, jail probably did something to him. My wife has a friend that is a psychologist, and she works directly in prison. And she's told me before, she goes, I've seen a person come in who's been 18, 19 years of age, had a whole different mindset. But after they go through the prison system, they get out and they live a bigger life of crime because of what they went through, or they feel like that they need to get back at somebody. So I totally, agree with your statements there.
You're putting a child, literally a child. It's not allowed anymore in New York. You're putting a child in with adults and people who are serving life sentences for murder. And, people falsely call prisons who are unaware of it a country club. Well, they are not a country club. There's a lot of dynamics going on among the prisoners in a prison. And when you put a child in that situation, you're setting him up for some really bad things to happen to him. And nobody can come out of that unscathed.
Yeah, even nowadays, even sending them to a juvenile jail is becoming just as bad as putting them in an adult prison, especially here in California. There's been some reports that They're like, I didn't know if I was in a juvenile hall jail or if I was at the main prison the way that it's going. And a lot of that, too, I think has to do with our justice system as well as the guards that's put in charge of that. So they play a large part of that, too, as well. So I'm a huge advocate for that and for people being where they need to be. Not saying that John doesn't need to serve what he did, but I think that for some of these people, there's a better way to rehabilitate them, especially if they're getting out, than just throw them in an all-out prison system where they're due to get beat and things of that nature.
Yeah, need some programs in there. I wouldn't even know where to start. Like I said, it's so broken, but a lot of changes need to be made.
So what has this whole ordeal did to you personally?
I kind of mentioned some of this in the book, that initially it made me leery of entering into other relationships. And for a brief time, I started meeting people, men, women, friends, lovers, whatever, in whatever context, just meeting people generally. And initially not trusting them until they did things to gain my trust. But that didn't last a very long time because as human beings, we're just not built that way, which is why it's so easy for people to fall into the trap of a psychopath, because you tend to believe people until they give you reason not to. So I really feel as though I've gone completely back to myself. I'm a happy person. Life is great. I don't feel like I have any lasting effects from this. And I certainly don't approach meeting new people with distrust. So yeah, I'm doing a lot better, but there were other victims in this story other than me. I can't speak for them. I imagine, at least one will have lifelong effects, negative effects from this.
Yeah. He had many of them, and I wish them the best. I know you were very careful in the book. And I do want to thank you for that, too. A lot of authors should do this, where you put an asterisk or a mark next to the name that was changed. You told us at the beginning you had to change some names, but we knew those names, right? So I hate going through a book like, yeah, they changed the names, but what name did they change? So thank you for that. It really does help me as the reader when I see that. I'm like, okay, well, I know they're talking about someone else, but this is not the real name. But it helps me drive that into the story better because my mind isn't constantly wondering, okay, well, is this the name that she changed? So thank you for that. What made you come up with that idea to do that?
Well, I certainly wanted to protect the victims, and because it's a nonfiction book, I didn't want to put people's private lives out there. I discussed with the publisher the idea of changing the names, giving pseudonyms to the law enforcement people who were involved. There were a lot of problems with these people. It's all backed up by court records, by documents, by body cam, everything. There are a lot of negative things to be said with how they handled things. And I basically outed them all. And because of that, leading into publication, I had a lot of anxiety. Is there going to be retaliation? Are they going to be parked outside? These are powerful people. Can't out powerful people in books without a fear of reprisal. So discussing this with my editor at the publishing house, she said, you know what? There's something about the permanence of a book. And if you don't have their real names in there, they might be less angry, is what she said. I don't have any problem talking to you even right now and telling you what the real names are of the police officers, the judges, the public officials. But we chose at the time to leave them out of the actual book.
You segued into my next question, which was, being that this book does deal with real life and other people's lives as well, have you received any blowback, not only from this book, but from your first one about Lucas, from anyone?
I received no blowback for A Jacket Off the Gorge. I didn't personally receive any blowback from Without a Prayer. But I did hear secondhand that some of the other people who were members of that cult involved in the book Without a Prayer was calling my whole book a book of lies. Well, if it's a book of lies, I have yet to be sued for it, because it is certainly illegal to publish a nonfiction work with real names or even with pseudonyms and have it be lies. Everything has to be vetted by an attorney. It's very carefully worded. Things were stricken just to make sure everything in these books are just illegally sound. Clearly, you can't publish a book of lies. So, but really, overwhelmingly, the feedback, all of the feedback to me has been phenomenal, outstanding, and a lot of gratitude from Without a Prayer, from the people who were involved and close to Lucas, gratitude for bringing to light the role of this cult and how the cult, manipulated these people to do what they did. And I've heard some gratitude from people who have read A Jacket Off the Gorge, who have been in situations of domestic violence themselves and have applauded me for speaking out on behalf of victims.
No, I definitely appreciate you and thank you for that. I've talked to many other people too that does. I always say that those of us that either write or talk about true crime, we do it because we have a passion for it, because somehow we've been touched by it, either directly or indirectly. And by writing books like A Jacket Off the Gorge, putting your own personal story out there, it does help. You never know who's going to pick up that book, especially after hearing this and say, let me go read that. And then as they're reading it, they're like, you know what? I'm not by myself. Maybe somebody is thinking about suicide at that point, but they read your book and figure out, hey, well, if Susan can go through this and she's come out of it, she's written a couple great books, maybe there's hope for me. And that's why I do this. I'm like you. I don't care if I ever make a dime. I do, have monetization situations for when I go on trips, but it goes back into my show. If I never make a dime off of anything that I do, if I reach one person, my job's done. If I reached you somehow or helped you save your life or made you a better life, my job is done. And I think for those of us that does this work, if you're doing it for monetary gain, then you need to get out, because this is a lifelong work and you have to be passionate about it.
I love your words, David. Like, you can't see me, but I'm almost crying over here because your words are so powerful and they're so true. And yay, the good people are going to win, right?
Well, thank you. I do have to ask this about Without a Prayer. Cults are vicious. They threaten to kill people. I know Scientology, some people say they're not a cult, but they've been listed as one of the biggest ones. You've got stars saying that they've been followed and everything like that. Were you nervous or afraid that when you put this out, that maybe the cult would have reacted a lot differently than what they did in harsh terms?
Actually, a judge granted me a concealed carry pistol permit for this reason in itself. When you're an author, you're talking about where you're going to book signings. If somebody's ticked off, well, you've got, at this point, Without a Prayer came out, there were 7 people in jails and prisons, I believe, at the time. Could they tell a buddy that's getting out, hey, go after this person? And then in New York State now, everybody is by default a concealed carry holder. I believe, I'm not entirely sure, but at the time you needed permission and you needed a reason. So I was granted that based on this reason. Sure, there is a worry of that. I think it's rare that those things happen, but you need to be aware of it.
Well, I don't blame you. I commend the judge for that, because whenever we tell truth, there's people out there that don't want to hear that. Or like you said, they've already written and said it's a lie. If you look at every cult across the board, maybe with the exception of Jim Jones and the Guyana tragedy, because those are people that was in that, they would come out and say, yeah, this is what happened. But every other cult I've seen, that's the first thing they say. This is the biggest lie. This stuff's never happened. And I'm like, then how do these people come up with this stuff that's never happened?
You know why, David? Because when you go through this and you're programmed by a cult and you're doing these things, it's hard to turn around and say, you know what? I was fooled. I was fooled by this cult. People think they're idiots. They don't want to admit to that. But in the same vein, that's what goes on with domestic violence. So we've got this case involving me, and I'm standing up and I'm okay with saying I'm human. This guy fooled me. And then you get the people who say, no, you're an idiot. They wouldn't fool me. And that suppresses people's voice. They don't want to be called that. So they pretend, no, this guy didn't fool me. And in reading my book, the police were fooled. And they don't want to. There's a part of the book where John sets me up to be in a police standoff that I'm not even aware I'm in. I have no idea. I have no idea the story he's given police. Or police completely mishandle this. I wind up in handcuffs. Later on, I talked to the police chief about this. He doubles down and he defends them despite body cam video. Because you know why? I don't want to speak for all police officers, but I'm thinking it's very difficult for a police officer to stand up and say, I was fooled. This guy fooled me. And that's why the people who are fooled by cults just want to say, no, you're a liar. It didn't happen, rather than say, you're right. I got fooled.
The justice system will never admit that. Out of all the mistakes that's been made, Cops been fooled, they never do. You have very few that I've talked to that will actually come up and say, hey, you know what? This guy took me for a loop. I just totally off of my game, didn't know. But you're right. They'll cover that up and they're trying to spin it or they're gaslight it and say, oh, no, that's not what happened, but this is what happened. So I totally agree with you on that.
I even admitted in this book that I did recognize some signs. I didn't say, well, he completely caught me off guard. I admit as I go along that I'm seeing signs and that on some level I'm aware that I'm being manipulated. And I think that's important too, because you've got this question from the public of, why did she go back? And I go back to him. Why did I go back if I saw these signs? That's such a complex answer. We need to stop asking the victim why he or she went back and instead ask the perpetrator, why did you continue doing this? People go back for different reasons. Yes, I saw some signs. That doesn't make me an idiot. That just means that the manipulator had ingrained in me some stronger tactics to keep me coming back.
And I'll further that thought with you. Here's something I've never talked about on my journey, but my mother, as you know, if you listen to any of my stories, my mom and I were heavily abused. My dad was the abuser. My mom actually ran away a couple of times when we went to a shelter. But my mother married my dad at 21. It was the only love that she knew, the only thing that she knew, and he was very manipulative and persuasive. So guess what happened? He finds out miraculously where we are. He shows up and he gives this long line of, baby, I'm sorry, it'll never happen again. Please just come home. And he begs and he begs and he begs. And then your mind, you're right, because we're engraved, when we love somebody, to think maybe that was a one-time situation. Maybe he will be better. So he already knows in the back of his mind what he's going to do as soon as he suckers her to come back. But she's like, okay, well, it's the only person I know and this is the only thing I got. Let's go back. Then it becomes worse. I agree with you, and it angers me when I continually hear that question, or my God, he had to sleep sometime, you could have ran, or you went to the store, why didn't you run away? It angers me because if you're not living in it, you don't understand that if something goes wrong with that escape, or something goes wrong with you turning somebody in, the consequences of that is dire. And you don't want to take that chance, especially if you have a child involved. So I'm glad that you pointed that out because as you can tell, I'm very passionate about that. I hear that all the time. I heard about my mom and I'm like, you didn't live it. You weren't there. Stop judging it.
Many factors involved in that. Yeah, right on. Yeah.
So today you are a survivor. I think those of us that are victims turn into survivors. You're spreading your truth. What is life looking like today for Susan Ashline?
I am working on another true crime story. Do you want to hear about it?
Absolutely.
So this one is about a guy named Gordon Woody, was his nickname, Gordon Woody Maurer. And if you Google him, you'll see he made international news back in 2017 because his escape attempt from a maximum security prison was thwarted. There are a lot of pieces around that story. He was tasked with fixing locks. In fact, he was taught metalworking and he was brought to locations that were secure locations in the prison. And he on his own was making copies of master keys. He planned to escape prison in this pine box that he built under the nose of prison guards and practiced his escape for a year. So all of that stuff comes into play, but he has this background of, he was in prison because when he was 18, he'd shot and killed both of his parents. And there was a national manhunt for him. He was on America's Most Wanted, and he was picked up in Texas after fleeing with his 14-year-old girlfriend. So it covers his whole history and going through, I do hours and hours of recorded interviews with him. And though our discussions are embedded in the manuscript, and it's Okay, I know it's my book and everything, but David, it's so interesting. You'll have to read it. No word on anything when it comes out or anything yet. I'm just working on it right now, but it's really good.
Well, I'll be definitely looking forward to it. If it's anything like the book that I just read, Jacket Off the Gorge, and I'm sure Without a Prayer is excellent. I just can't wait for this one to come out. I'm sure it's gonna be great. Is there any advice that you would give to anyone that's been through anything like this, similar or any type of domestic violence?
My tendency, if I want to be honest here, my advice is horrible, and it's the wrong message to send to domestic violence victims, but I don't recommend anybody call police. Calling police can blow up in your face. It's horrible. It's abusive. The abuse by the police was for me worse than or equal to the abuse by the perpetrator. It was a terrifying experience. I would never do it again. I know that's not helpful to people who have gone through domestic violence situations. If I'm going to say something helpful, I would just say, hang in there, try to find a way out. People really have to recognize this on their own. No one can tell them, get out. This is a bad relationship for you. You have to come to your own awareness. And I'm hoping that if somebody in that position reads A Jacket Off the Gorge, it will empower them to do just that, to get out and to recognize what's going on in their own lives. Trust your gut.
I know this is a controversial statement that you made and I'm about to make, but I have to agree. I've been there. Especially a man being on the other end of being domestically abused by a woman, and especially in my case, I'm African American and the woman that's abusing me was white. That just made the situation all worse when I was in Minneapolis. The problem is they looked for me first and wanted to arrest me when I'm not the one doing anything. And this is why men, no matter what race you are, don't come out and talk about domestic violence that happened to them, because they know no one's going to believe them. When I looked at the cop and said, man, look, she's hitting me with the frying pan and everything else, they looked at me and laughed and they said, look at you and look at her. Look how big you are and how tall and how strong. And like I said to him, I said, you're right. I says, but she's abusive because she knows the one thing I won't do, which is I won't hit her back because she's a woman. Have you considered that? So there would be some resources that I think is better off than the police that I will add into the bottom of this episode. Places that people that are men or women can call that can get help and help get them out of the situation. Because I agree with you, the police sometimes makes the whole situation worse.
Yeah, it's a horrible situation. And what you just described is hard to listen to. And I'm so sorry for that. They have these prejudices involved in that and stereotypes. And in my book and talking, in reading John's story, I am sure that it helped his credibility on many occasions that he was a good-looking white guy.
Yep, that always helps. And, a lot of serial killers that was great looking got away with their crimes for a long time because of that. They're like, how can this person do this? He looks so good. It's not always about looks. Looking at you, you're a very beautiful person. I would never think that you went through any of the things you wrote about in your book just by looking at you. So you can never judge a book by its cover.
That's true. That's true. And people know me and know, how I've been in the community and my work and say, well, you're so bright. How could you have fallen for this?
What do you want readers to take away from reading A Jacket Off the Gorge, True Story of the Biggest Liar?
I think the biggest thing is that our criminal justice system is completely broken. You get your voice out there and be heard if you agree with me, and contact people and look for change and not just talk about it. Come up with ideas and approach lawmakers with them. Try to figure out how we can fix this, because we can't just write and read stories about it. We need our voices heard.
In closing, what would you like to say to your readers and fans that may be listening to this today?
I don't know. My knee-jerk reaction is this. I've been reading the reviews, particularly the ones that are coming out on A Jacket Off the Gorge. Reviews are always important to an author, so please take some time to write them. I feel like every single one of these reviews has made me cry, brought me close to it. And I'm just so proud of my readers. They're so intelligent, and the issues and points they bring up in the reviews are so important. And I'm always amazed when someone pulls something out of my book that I really didn't think anybody would pick up on. So I guess I would say, I really appreciate every reader and every reader's thoughts. And I'm out there in social media. I love answering reader questions. If anyone wants to contact me, I think I know my Twitter feed. If you follow me, you can message me. My personal Facebook is just that. It's personal and private, but I have an author Susan Ashline Facebook page, and people message me there all the time, and I'd love to hear from you.
Well, Susan, let me tell you, it has definitely been enlightening. Thank you for joining me here today. I love your book. I'm going back, and I'm going to definitely read your first book, because Without a Prayer, because you're a fabulous author, and you really take care of what you do, and I appreciate that. I hope you enjoyed your time here today, because I would love to have you come back after I do read your very first book, Without a Prayer. I want to have you come back. We'll discuss that. And then when your third book comes out, I would love to have you come back.
I love it. Yeah, let's do it. Thanks for having me on.
Thank you for coming today. It's been my pleasure. All right, guys, that was the incredible Susan Ashline. Get your copy of A Jacket Off the Gorge, True Story of the Biggest Liar at Amazon and anywhere that you can buy books at. While you are there, pick up a copy of her first book, Without a Prayer, The Death of Lucas Leonard and How One Church Became a Cult. Although I have not read that book yet, after reading A Jacket Off the Gorge, I can tell you that it's going to be fabulous. All right, before I get out of here, I'd like to remind you where I'm going to be. I will be at True Crime Fest in Fayetteville, Arkansas, August 2nd and 3rd, 2024. And then after that, I will be at CrimeCon UK in London, representing my other podcast, Extinguished, with the great LaDonna Humphrey, September 21st and 22nd, 2024. Links to get your tickets for both are in the show notes below. Also, you can find everything you need to know about Susan Ashline on my website, as it will be attached to her episode, and also the links to all of her social media and where you can buy her books will also be found in the show notes. So once again, thank you for joining us today. I know you have many choices in true crime and interview podcasts. I am grateful for the last 2.5 years you have chose me. Be good to yourself and each other, and always remember to always stay humbled. An act of kindness can make someone's day. A little love and compassion can go a long way. And remember that there is an extraordinary person in all of us. I'll catch you guys on the next one.
Don't forget to rate, comment, and subscribe. Join us on social media. One link to the link tree has it all. Feel free to drop us a line at truecrimeandauthors@gmail.com. Cover art and logo designed by Arslan. Sound mixing and editing by David McClam. Intro script by Sophie Wild and David McClam. Theme music, Legendary by New Alchemist. Introduction and ending credits by Jackie Voice. See you next time on True Crime, Authors, and Extraordinary People.